The insistent chirping of my burner phone sliced through the pre-dawn quiet, a sound I'd grown to loathe more than any other. I fumbled for it on the nightstand, my fingers stiff with the lingering chill of sleep. "William," I rasped, my voice a gravel road after a long drought. "Got one for I, William," the officer on the other end said, his tone flat professional. "Eleanor Vance, her estate, looks like a robbery, but it's a mess. And the study was locked from the inside." I scrubbed a hand over my face, the stubble rasping under my palm. Eleanor Vance. The name hung in the air, heavy with philanthropy and influence. The city's darling. A locked room, a robbery. My kind of mess. On my way. The drive through the sleeping city was a blur of streetlights and the faint promise of dawn on the eastern horizon. My old sedan, a faithful companion through countless late-night calls, ate up the miles. As I cleared the city limits and started towards the wealthier suburbs, a familiar landmark loomed into view, desolate and skeletal in the gloom. The abandoned drive-through safari park. Its grand, crumbling entrance gate, adorned with faded, roaring lion statues, stood as a monument to a forgotten ambition. I'd passed it 1,000 times, always a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes and dreams could wither. Tonight, it felt like a silent sentinel guarding the path to another kind of ruin. Eleanor Vance's estate was a sprawling, ornate affair, perched on a manicured hill overlooking a valley still shrouded in mist. Uniformed officers milled about, their flashlights cutting swaths through the gloom, their faces grim. A patrol car's blue and red strobes painted the grand facade in a macabre dance. A younger officer, barely out of the academy if his nervous energy was any indication, met me at the heavy oak front door. "Detective William," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Thank I for coming, we've secured the scene. The butler, a Mr. Finch, found her." "Tell me about it," I said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. The material stretched taut over my knuckles, a familiar second skin. "Mr. Finch usually brings Mrs. Vance her morning tea at 6. He knocked, got no answer, tried the handle, found it locked. He called out, no response. Said he knew something was wrong, so he used a spare key to the study door, which he keeps in a lockbox in the pantry. He was found her inside. "And the spare key?" I asked. He said he immediately put it back in the lockbox after unlocking the door, then called us. The officer pointed to a man in a crisp suit standing rigidly by the staircase, his face a mask of controlled grief. "That's Mr. Finch." I nodded, my gaze sweeping over the polished marble foyer, the priceless artwork adorning the walls. Not a single thing seemed out of place here. "The study is through here." The officer led me down a long, silently carpeted hallway. "We've barely touched anything." The air grew heavy with the cloying scent of old money and something metallic. The study door stood ajar, revealing a tableau of controlled chaos. My eyes, weary though they were, immediately began their dance, cataloging every detail. Eleanor Vance lay slumped over her expansive mahogany desk, a pool of dark crimson staining the rich wood beneath her head. A heavy, ornate letter opener, silver filigree glinting dully, was clutched loosely in her right hand, the tip stained. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at an open ledger. Papers were scattered across the desk, some torn, others crumpled. A large, empty safe stood agape in the corner, its heavy door swinging uselessly. "Robbery gone wrong," the young officer offered, his voice hushed now. I ignored him, stepping carefully into the room, my gaze fixed on the victim. Eleanor Vance, the picture of composure in life, now looked like a broken doll. He was dressed in a silk robe, her silver hair disheveled. The room itself was a testament to her life shelves crammed with first editions, awards gleaming on a side table, a faint scent of jasmine and old leather. But the disarray on the desk, the open safe, it all screamed a violent intrusion. I knelt beside the desk, careful not to disturb anything. The ledger was open to a page filled with neat handwriting, columns of figures and names. A quick glance showed sums, dates, and what looked like charitable donations. Nothing immediately screamed motive. "The window?" I asked, looking towards the large bay window overlooking the rear gardens. "Locked from the inside, latches intact. The officer confirmed. And the door, as I said, is locked from the inside too. No signs of forced entry anywhere, sir. It's like the intruder just vanished. My eyes narrowed. No forced entry, a locked room, a robbery, and Eleanor Vance, a woman known for her sharp mind and formidable will, seemingly killed by a simple letter opener which she herself held. It felt too neat, too staged. "Who else is in the house?" I asked, straightening up. "Besides Mr. Finch, there's Mrs. Vance's personal assistant, a MS, Anya Sharma, and her nephew, Mr. Julian Vance. They're both in the drawing room. We've taken their initial statements." I walked over to the open safe. It was deep, well-constructed. Inside, only dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. Nothing. No scattered papers, no broken compartments, just empty. Too clean, I thought. A thief, especially one who would resort to murder, usually left more of a mess, a frantic search. This looked organized. My gaze drifted back to Eleanor Vance's hand. The letter opener was clutched, not firmly, but almost delicately, and her eyes fixed on the ledger. What had she been looking at? What had she been thinking in her final moments? I walked back to the doorway, surveying the scene again. The scattered papers, the open ledger, the empty safe, the locked room, the letter opener. Every piece screamed robbery, but the overall picture felt off-key. The disarray on the desk seemed almost too perfect, too deliberate, as if someone wanted it to look like a struggle but hadn't quite committed to the full chaos. I turned to the young officer. "Bring Mr. Finch to me, then MS Sharma, then Mr. Vance, one at a time, and tell them not to touch anything, not to speak to anyone else, and tell the crime scene unit to be meticulous. I want prints on every surface, every single piece of paper." My voice was low, but carried the weight of years. My weariness was still there, a dull ache behind my eyes, but the puzzle had begun to snap into focus. This wasn't just a simple robbery. This was something far more intricate, far more personal. Eleanor Vance, the beloved philanthropist, had secrets, and one of them had just killed her. I walked over to the open safe. Nothing, just empty. A thief, especially one who would resort to murder, usually left more of a mess, a frantic search, a discarded item. This was surgical. I ran a gloved hand along the cold metal interior, then along the floor of the study, sweeping the beam across the polished mahogany and the ornate rug. My gaze snagged on a tiny dark speck near the base of the safe, almost hidden by the rug's pattern. It wasn't dust. It was hard, crystalline, glinting faintly. I knelt, examining it closer. It looked like a fragment of obsidian, perhaps, or a shard of very dark glass. No, not glass, too irregular, too dull despite the glint. I carefully picked it up with tweezers, dropping it into a small evidence bag. Curious, I mused. It didn't fit the scene, didn't seem to belong, but I had no context for it yet. I left the study, the uniformed officer sealing the door behind me. The grand foyer of Eleanor Vance's estate felt like a mausoleum, hushed and heavy. "Any luck, William?" the officer asked, his voice low. "Just questions," I replied, shaking my head. "Gather the family in the drawing room. I want to speak with them and the staff separately." My first interview was with the deceased's nephew. He was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a sharp suit, but his tie was askew and his eyes were red-rimmed. He sat stiffly on an antique sofa, clutching a tumbler of amber liquid. "Terrible business, William," he began, his voice raspy. "Aunt Eleanor, he was a force, a pillar of the community." "Indeed," I said, leaning forward slightly in my armchair. "When was the last time you spoke with her?" He hesitated, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "A few days ago. Monday, I think. She called about the trust, said he was making some changes." "Changes?" I prompted. "What kind of changes?" "He was always tinkering with things," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Her will, her charitable foundations. She'd get an idea and run with it. Said he was tired of dead weight and underperformers." His gaze drifted to a portrait of Eleanor on the wall, a faint flicker of resentment in his eyes. "We had a disagreement, actually, about the old abandoned drive-through safari park. I thought it had potential for a new ecological venture, a heritage site. But she insisted it was a money pit, a drain on resources. She wanted to sell it off, liquidate the assets, put it all into her new pet project. And what was this pet project? I asked, making a note. The mention of the safari park was unexpected, but it felt like a thread worth pulling. He scoffed softly. Something vague about reinvesting in the future. He was always a bit cryptic when he had a grand plan, said he was streamlining. I told her it was foolish. That land has history potential, but she wouldn't listen. He was determined. I watched him, noting the slight tightening around his jaw when he spoke of her determination. And your whereabouts yesterday evening, sir? He recited an alibi, a dinner meeting with colleagues, a late night at his club. It was smooth, almost too smooth. He seemed more annoyed by the scrutiny than grief-stricken. I thanked him and moved on. Next, the ambitious business partner. He was a man of impressive stature, impeccably dressed, radiating an air of controlled confidence. He offered his condolences with a practiced sincerity that felt thin around the edges. Eleanor was a visionary, the business partner stated, adjusting his cufflink. A true titan. This is a profound loss, not just for the city, but for our enterprise. I understand you and Eleanor were involved in several significant ventures. I began. Any recent projects that might have caused contention? He steepled his fingers. All large ventures have their moments of spirited discussion. Eleanor was a strong personality, but we always found common ground. Our latest project, a major urban redevelopment, was nearing completion. Billions at stake. He was particularly keen on its success. Was there any financial pressure? I inquired, watching his eyes. A flicker, barely perceptible. Every enterprise faces challenges, William, but Eleanor's finances were robust. A few minor liquidity issues recently, perhaps, due to some unexpected market fluctuations, but nothing she couldn't handle. He was in the process of divesting from some older, less profitable assets to shore up capital for the new development. I believe he was preparing to sell off the abandoned drive-through safari park land, among other things, to inject significant capital into our joint venture. The safari park again, this time with a clear financial motive. Did she seem distressed or concerned about anything in particular recently? He paused, a slight frown touching his brow. He was unusually private in the last few weeks, more so than usual. She mentioned he had uncovered some unpleasant truths and was clearing house both professionally and personally. I assumed she meant business decisions, but her tone was sharper, less forgiving. He looked away, then back at me, a hint of concern now in his gaze. She also told me she'd received a veiled threat, something about old debts coming due. I dismissed it as hyperbole. Eleanor had a flair for the dramatic sometimes. A veiled threat, old debts. This was a new layer. I made another note, the pen scratching faintly on the pad. Finally, the housekeeper, a woman with kind eyes and hands gnarled from years of service. He had been with Eleanor for decades, but he had her moods too. Her moods? I asked gently. Lately. He was very agitated, short-tempered. He was always on the phone late into the night, shouting sometimes, not at me, mind I, at whoever was on the other end. She wrung the handkerchief, and he was receiving odd letters, no return address. She'd read them, then burn them in the study fireplace, said they were ghosts from the past that needed to be put to rest. Did she ever mention who these ghosts were? The housekeeper shook her head. No, but he was very particular about who came to the house recently, only a few trusted people, and she changed the locks on the study door just last month. Said she wanted absolute privacy for her important papers. Changed the locks. That was significant. It reinforced the idea of a deliberate, contained environment. Unpleasant truths, ghosts from the past. Eleanor Vance, the beloved philanthropist, was clearly a more complicated woman than her public image suggested. The cracks were starting to show, revealing a deeper, more personal motive lurking beneath the surface of a simple robbery. I still didn't understand the fragment, but I had a growing suspicion that whatever was inside that safe, it was far more valuable than any jewels or cash. And someone desperately wanted it gone. The silence of my office was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left at Eleanor Vance's mansion. I sat at my desk, the fragment I'd found clutched between thumb and forefinger. Dark, almost black with a slightly irregular edge, it felt like a chipped piece of something once substantial, now reduced to a shard. It offered no immediate answers, only more questions. Changed the locks. That detail still gnawed at me. Someone wanted the study sealed, wanted to control the narrative of that room. The safe, gleaming and empty, was another knot in the thread. Too clean, too obvious. It screamed robbery, but my gut screamed distraction. Eleanor Vance, the beloved philanthropist, was clearly a more complicated figure than her public image suggested. I needed to dig deeper than the polished obituaries and the glowing testimonials. I needed the Eleanor Vance who made enemies, the one who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. I pulled up old corporate records, news archives that predated her philanthropic fame. It took hours of sifting through dry financial statements and forgotten local news pieces. Most of it was boilerplate, the usual ascent of a sharp businesswoman. Then, a name resurfaced repeatedly in the margins of a controversial land acquisition from nearly 2 decades ago, Vance Holdings. Before the charitable trusts, before the galas, Eleanor Vance had been ruthless. The specific deal involved the acquisition of a large tract of land, ostensibly for development, but it had crushed a smaller, family-run business in the process. A drive-through safari park of all things. The owner, a man named Robert, had fought tooth and nail, but Vance Holdings had outmaneuvered him, bought up surrounding parcels, and forced his hand. He'd lost everything. The park had been left to rot, a monument to a broken dream. I felt a prickle of recognition. Robert. The name itself didn't ring a bell, but the story. A small business owner, ruined by a powerful corporation, his family left destitute. I'd seen it before. No foul play was ever definitively proven, no body found, but the family had always blamed the stress, the financial ruin, the crushing weight of their loss for her fragile state of mind. I'd worked that case. Ghosts from the past. The connection made my stomach clench. This wasn't just another case anymore. Could it be from the abandoned drive-through safari park? An old sign, a piece of equipment. The thought propelled me from my chair. I needed to see it, needed to understand the scope of Robert's loss, and perhaps find a physical link to the fragment. The drive out was long, the urban sprawl slowly giving way to overgrown fields and forgotten highways. The entrance to the abandoned drive-through safari park was marked by 2 crumbling stone pillars, their once grand gates now twisted metal and rust. A faded, sun-bleached sign, half devoured by ivy, still bore the park's name, its cheerful font now mocking the desolation. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The path into the park was barely discernible, choked with weeds and saplings. I pushed through, my boots crunching on fallen leaves and unseen debris. Further in, a series of crumbling concrete structures, painted in what must have once been vibrant jungle murals, now peeled and cracked, looked like ancient ruins. As I navigated deeper, my eyes scanned the ground, the overgrown foliage, looking for anything that might match the fragment. My thoughts, however, kept drifting back to Robert and his daughter. I felt a familiar frustration building, a pressure in my chest. I couldn't let it cloud my judgment, but it was impossible to ignore. I was nearing the old administrative building, a squat concrete block half hidden by vines, when I spotted it. Lying half buried in the mud near a collapsed fence was a small plastic token. The token, though faded, still bore a faint, embossed logo, a stylized lion's head, the emblem of the abandoned drive-through safari park. I knelt, pulling it free from the mud. It was undeniable. The fragment from Eleanor's safe matched the material, the color, and even the subtle curve of this token. It wasn't just a random piece of plastic. It was a souvenir, a memento, a key to Robert's ruined past. He was older, his face etched with lines of hardship and bitterness. His eyes, though weary, held a spark of something fierce, something that had been simmering for 20 years. "William," he answered, his voice a low growl. I knew I'd come here eventually. My hand instinctively went to my coat pocket, feeling the weight of the fragment. Robert had known Eleanor. He had a motive clear as day, a life destroyed by her ambition. But his presence here, his calm anticipation, felt too staged, too convenient. Was this the answer, or just another layer of the deception? The cold dread in my gut hadn't subsided. The disgruntled former colleague, let's call him that, because the man's name felt like a trap in my mind, had been too calm, too poised. His story, a tale of ambition thwarted and a life derailed by Eleanor Vance, fit the narrative of a vengeful killer perfectly. Too perfectly. It felt like a performance, an invitation to a conclusion already written. I'd seen it before, the killer who wanted to be caught, or the one who wanted to be thought caught, pointing fingers in all the wrong directions. My mind kept replaying the scene in Eleanor's study, the impossible locked room. I'd walked away from it, focused on the human element, the tangled web of relationships. But the disgruntled former colleague's unsettling composure had forced me to reconsider. What if the locked room wasn't just a puzzle, but a deliberate, intricate deception? A stage set to distract from the true method, the true motive. I drove back to Eleanor's estate, the late afternoon sun casting long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns. The uniformed officer at the gate recognized my car and waved me through without a word. The house, usually bustling with the silent activity of investigators, felt strangely quiet. My team had cleared out for the day, leaving me to my gnawing thoughts. I let myself into the study, the air stale with the scent of old paper and dried lavender. My eyes immediately went to the heavy oak bookcase that lined the far wall. I remembered a faint, almost imperceptible scratch on the polished floorboards directly in front of it, a detail I'd noted but dismissed as incidental wear. Now, under the harsher glare of my own scrutiny, I knelt. The scratch was gone, not just faded but meticulously buffed out, leaving no trace. My jaw tightened. Someone had been here. Someone had cleaned up. This wasn't just evidence being tampered with, this was a message. The killer was aware of my investigation, actively monitoring my progress, anticipating my next move. The locked room wasn't just a challenge. It was a calculated deception, designed to mislead, to make me chase ghosts while the real killer slipped away. I swept my gaze across the room again, slower this time, searching for anything new, anything out of place. My eyes landed on the small, antique writing desk near the window. I'd gone through its contents, found nothing. But now, nestled between a stack of pristine stationery and a silver letter opener, was a single, dried seed pod. It was unlike anything else in the elegant, ordered room, rough, spiky, and distinctly out of place. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. It smelled faintly of damp earth and something wild, untamed. It wasn't from Eleanor's manicured garden, that much I knew. I pulled out my phone, snapping a picture of the seed pod, then sent it to a botanist colleague I knew. Within minutes, his reply came back. Looks like Acacia erioloba, William, camel thorn, native to arid regions, often found in specific themed botanical collections, or abandoned drive-through safari parks. An abandoned drive-through safari park. The words hung in the air, incongruous with Eleanor Vance's world of high society and polished surfaces. But the seed pod was a deliberate plant, a breadcrumb. The killer wasn't just cleaning up, they were leaving a trail, twisting the knife. This wasn't just about escaping justice, it was about playing a game. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I navigated the winding, overgrown access road to the abandoned drive-through safari park. The entrance gate, once a vibrant welcome, now hung askew on rusted hinges, choked by thorny vines. The air grew cooler, heavier, filled with the croaking of unseen frogs and the rustling of creatures in the undergrowth. This place reeked of decay and forgotten dreams. I drove slowly, my headlights cutting through the encroaching twilight, illuminating faded signs warning of lions ahead and do not feed the animals. The enclosures were empty, their fences crumbling, the concrete watering holes cracked and dry. It was a ghost of an attraction, swallowed by nature. I parked near what looked like a maintenance shed, its windows long shattered, its corrugated metal roof collapsing inward. The seed pod in my pocket felt like a compass needle pulling me deeper. I pushed open the shed's rotting door, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight. Tools lay scattered, rusted and forgotten. Shovels, rakes, a broken wheelbarrow. But in a far corner, obscured by years of grime and fallen leaves, I found something else. It was a workbench, surprisingly clear of debris. On it, carefully arranged, were several intricate wooden models. One, no bigger than my hand, was a miniature replica of a wall section, complete with a tiny, almost invisible seam. Next to it, a series of small, precisely cut gears and levers lay alongside a schematic meticulously drawn, detailing a counterweight system designed to slide the wall section silently into place. It was a prototype, a working model of a hidden mechanism, designed for stealth and precision. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about a locked door, it was about a moving wall, a secret passage. The killer hadn't broken in or out, they had simply made a section of the study disappear. The locked room was a masterpiece of misdirection, a conjurer's trick on a grand scale. I studied the schematic, memorizing the angles, the weight distribution, the specific points of leverage. The killer had built this, practiced it, perfected it here in this forgotten place. This wasn't the work of a vengeful amateur, but a meticulous architect of murder. I left the abandoned drive-through safari park with a new understanding, the seed pod now a burning ember in my pocket. The night was fully upon me when I returned to Eleanor's study. I walked directly to the bookcase, my eyes scanning the shelves, the ornate carvings, the spines of countless books. Applying the principles I'd seen in the schematic, I ran my hand along the molding, feeling for any slight imperfection, and then I found it. A tiny, almost imperceptible button hidden within a carved rosette. I pressed it. It was dusty, unused for years perhaps, but undeniably there. An alternate exit, a secret route. My entire understanding of the crime shattered. The locked room was a lie. Eleanor Vance hadn't been trapped. He had been betrayed by her own home. The killer wasn't just clever, they were intimately familiar with the estate, perhaps even involved in its construction or design. And they were still out there, watching, playing their deadly game, leaving clues and cleaning up traces, always one step ahead. Every assumption I'd made, every lead I'd followed now felt like dust. I had to reevaluate everything. The game had just begun. The seed pod felt strangely heavy in my palm, a tiny, segmented cylinder of dried husks. Around me, the abandoned drive-through safari park stretched, a skeletal monument to ambition. Rusting gates hung crookedly. Empty enclosures, once vibrant with exotic life, were now overgrown with native weeds and scrub. The paved paths were cracked, reclaimed by moss. The air was still, save for the whisper of dry leaves and the distant caw of a crow. No roaring lions, no trumpeting elephants, just the quiet decay of a forgotten dream. Eleanor Vance, a woman of meticulously cultivated taste, would never have set foot here willingly, not unless it held some deep, dark significance for her or for someone close to her. The seed pod wasn't just from here. It was a deliberate breadcrumb dropped by someone who wanted me to find it, or rather to understand its implication. It was a taunt, a final, cruel twist. I closed my fingers around the pod, picturing Eleanor's immaculate study. The locked door, the bolted windows, the key resting mockingly on the desk. Every detail of that scene had screamed impossibility, a stage trick designed to confound. But the seed pod and this desolate place finally pulled the curtain back. It wasn't just a locked room. It was a relocked room. My mind raced, replaying every moment in Eleanor's study. The opulent wallpaper, the heavy mahogany desk, the shelves crammed with first editions. I remembered the slight, almost imperceptible misalignment of one of the bookshelf panels near the fireplace. I dismissed it as the charming imperfection of an old house, a settling beam, or a clumsy carpenter. Now it screamed. It wasn't a flaw, it was a door, a hidden service hatch perhaps, or a secret passage. The kind of thing built into grand estates for servants to move unseen or for a collector to access a hidden vault. The killer hadn't entered through the main door nor the windows. They'd used that passage. They'd slipped in, confronted Eleanor, and ended her life. Then, they'd executed the final, ingenious flourish. I imagined the scene. The killer standing over Eleanor's body, the seed pod still perhaps clinging to their shoe from a recent visit to this abandoned safari park, or perhaps even in their pocket, waiting to be dropped. They secured the heavy oak door from the inside, slid the bolt home, then placed the key on the desk, precisely where it would be found. Then they slipped back through the hidden passage, making their escape. But how did they lock the passage from their side, while ensuring the main door remained bolted from the inside? That's where the seed pod came in. It wasn't just a clue to the killer's background. It was a clue to the method. The seed pod, unique to a particular plant cultivated years ago within the park's specialized botanical section, would have been rare, and the killer had deliberately left it. I walked the perimeter of the abandoned safari park, my gaze sweeping over the dilapidated structures. The old administrative building, a crumbling brick shell, stood nearest to the main entrance. It had once housed records, files, perhaps even a small office for the manager. The manager, it clicked. The estate manager, always present, always helpful, always just outside the direct line of suspicion. They had managed Eleanor's entire estate, including her personal affairs, for decades. They would know every secret, every hidden crevice of that house, including any forgotten passages. And they would have been privy to every one of Eleanor's investments, including the failed venture that was now this very abandoned safari park. I drove back to the city, the reconstruction solidifying in my mind. The motive, the method, the killer. It all revolved around this place, a ghost from Eleanor's past, and a secret that the estate manager had clearly hoped would stay buried. Eleanor, the philanthropist, was known for her generosity but also for her unwavering sense of justice. She must have been on the verge of exposing something. I found the estate manager in their small, impeccably tidy office adjoining Eleanor's main residence. They were hunched over ledgers, a meticulous figure in a gray suit, their spectacles perched low on their nose. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. "I need a moment of my time," I responded, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the room. The estate manager looked up, their face a mask of polite concern. "William, of course, what can I do for I?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I've been out to the abandoned drive-through safari park." A flicker in their eyes, barely there, but I saw it. The careful composure wavered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, a rather desolate place, isn't it? Eleanor had hoped to revitalize it, I know. A nature conservancy. Perhaps, such a shame it never came to fruition." Their voice was smooth, practiced. "He was about to, wasn't she?" I pushed off the doorframe, taking a step into the room. "Revitalize it, I mean. Or rather, he was about to expose the truth about its failure." The estate manager slowly removed their spectacles, placing them on the desk with deliberate precision. "I'm not sure I follow." "The hidden passage in her study," I continued, ignoring their feigned ignorance. "The one behind the bookshelf panel. I knew about it, didn't I? Knew it was there, knew how to operate it, knew it was the perfect way to get in and out of a supposedly locked room." Their lips thinned. "That's an absurd accusation." "Is it?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the seed pod, placing it gently on the corner of their polished desk. "It was found in Eleanor's study, William. A little calling card, perhaps, or just a careless oversight." Estate manager's gaze fixed on the seed pod, and for the first time I saw the carefully constructed facade crack. Their knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the desk. Eleanor was going to reveal everything, wasn't she? I pressed, my voice low. "The fraudulent land deal years ago, the one that crippled countless small investors, the one that you orchestrated and then buried under layers of complex financial maneuvering. The safari park was just the tip of the iceberg, a symbol of your avarice. She'd found the proof. She didn't comprehend the necessity, the sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" I scoffed softly. "You sacrifice people's livelihoods for your own gain. Everything I built, everything I worked for gone, just because of some old, irrelevant mistake. The mask was off, revealing the raw, calculating desperation beneath. The locked room, a perfect illusion, undone by a single, overlooked seed. The manager's confession didn't break the tension. It merely reshaped it, sharpening it into a cold, glittering blade. My gaze didn't waver from the manager's face, now stripped of its practiced composure, revealing a raw, almost desperate vulnerability beneath. The air in the interrogation room, already thick with unspoken truths, grew heavier still. "I knew," the manager whispered, the words ragged. "He was going to expose me. Everything." I leaned forward, my voice low, steady, cutting through the manager's fractured resolve. Expose what exactly? But there was nowhere left to run. The park, the manager rasped, the single word a bitter taste. The abandoned drive-through safari park. It was my project, my legacy, before it all went wrong, before the money disappeared. My mind raced, connecting the dots I'd been gathering for weeks. The philanthropic ventures, the careful accounting, the manager's meticulous nature. It all made a twisted kind of sense now. Eleanor Vance, the beloved philanthropist, had a reputation for thoroughness, for digging deep into the projects she funded, ensuring every penny served its purpose. It was her virtue and ultimately her downfall. "You siphoned funds from the park's development," I stated, not as a question but as a pronouncement. "Years ago, before it became the desolate ruin it is today," and Eleanor found out. A shudder ran through the manager's frame. "It wasn't supposed to fail. I just borrowed. I was going to pay it back. But then the permits fell through, the public interest waned, and the whole thing collapsed. I covered my tracks. For years I covered them. No one ever suspected." The manager's voice rose, a desperate plea for understanding that I couldn't offer. But Eleanor, he had a way. He was reviewing the old records, looking into the history of the land, preparing for a new community initiative. She kept asking about the initial capital, the original investors. He was so close. I saw the look in her eyes last week. She knew. The manager's hands, which had been clasped tightly, now trembled, resting on the scarred surface of the table. He was going to confront me. She'd hinted at a meeting, a private conversation about past irregularities. I couldn't let her. Everything I'd built, my reputation, my life, it would have been shattered. A robbery, you thought, would obscure the truth. The manager nodded, a single bitter tear tracing a path down a cheek. I thought it was perfect. The missing jewelry, the ransacked drawers. Who would suspect her trusted manager? The pieces clicked into place with a grim finality. The carefully orchestrated scene, the seemingly impossible locked room scenario, the missing items that were mere diversions. It wasn't about what was taken, but what was hidden. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a victim of a random act. He was a casualty of her own unwavering integrity, her relentless pursuit of truth. The abandoned drive-through safari park, a symbol of forgotten dreams and failed ambition, had become the grave marker for a hidden crime, and now for Eleanor herself. My colleague, who had been observing from the corner, moved silently, ready to process the confession, to make it official. As the uniformed officers led the manager away, the door clicking shut behind them, an oppressive silence descended. I remained seated, the weight of the resolution pressing down on me. Another case closed. Another life taken. Another life irrevocably altered. The irony was a bitter pill. I thought of Eleanor's carefully curated study, the books, the awards, the quiet dignity of her life. All a facade, not for her, but for the hidden ugliness that festered around her, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. It made me wonder, as it always did, how many other such secrets lay buried beneath the polished surfaces of this city, waiting for an intrepid hand to unearth them. The emotional toll of these cases never truly lessened. Each one left a faint scar, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both profound good and terrible evil. Justice had been served, yes, but the lines between justice and vengeance, between right and wrong, always seemed to blur in the aftermath. The manager's actions, born of fear and a desperate attempt to protect a past misdeed, felt less like pure malice and more like a tragic inevitability, a consequence of choices made long ago at that ill-fated abandoned drive-through safari park. I stood up, stretching the stiffness from my joints. The weariness was a familiar companion, a dull ache behind my eyes in the depths of my bones. There was no exhilaration, no triumphant surge of satisfaction. Only a quiet sense of duty fulfilled, mixed with the ever-present understanding that while this specific case was closed, the scars of human nature, the hidden pains and desperate acts would always remain. They would always find a way to surface, to demand attention, to leave their indelible mark. And I, William, would always be there, sifting through the wreckage, searching for the truth, one shattered secret at a time. I picked up my coat, the city lights beginning to glow outside the window, promising another dawn, another day, and undoubtedly another mystery.